What if I told you the world we live in today, the laws we follow, the cities we inhabit, the roads we walk, all carry the fingerprints of an empire that vanished more than 1,500 years ago? An empire born from the legend of two abandoned twins and a wolf that rose from a tiny village on the banks of a river to rule over continents, shape civilizations, and define the very foundations of modern society. Welcome to Info Twist Zone, and today we unravel the epic saga of the Roman Empire, a story of ambition, conquest, betrayal, and legacy that still echoes in the very bones of our world. The tale of Rome begins not with armies or emperors, but with myth. And like all great myths, it blurs the line between legend and history. Long before Rome was an empire, before it was even a city, there was a woman named Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin and daughter of a deposed king. According to legend, she was visited by Mars, the god of war, and bore him twin sons, Romulus and Remus. But the birth of these children threatened the usurper on the throne, and so they were cast into the river Tiber to die. Fate, however, had other plans. A she-wolf discovered the crying infants, nursed them, and raised them as her own. They grew into fierce warriors and natural leaders, gathering bands of followers around them. Yet destiny would not spare them conflict. When the time came to found a new settlement, the brothers quarreled over where to build it. In a heartbreaking turn, Romulus killed Remus and named the new city after himself, Rome. It was the year 753 BCE. And from this bloody beginning, a legend was born. Romulus became the city's first king, and early Rome was little more than a cluster of huts on the Palatine Hill. Desperate for growth, Romulus turned to desperate measures. He invited the neighboring Sabines to a festival, slaughtered their men, and forced their women into marriage. For over 2 centuries, Rome remained a monarchy, ruled by kings chosen not by bloodline but by election, each wielding absolute power for life. Yet tyranny would be the monarchy's undoing. The last king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was a cruel and arrogant ruler. His abuses provoked an uprising, and in 509 BCE, the Romans overthrew him, vowing never again to be ruled by kings. In his place, they established a new system, the Roman Republic. At first glance, the Republic appeared democratic. Power was vested in 2 annually elected consuls, and a Senate advised them. But beneath the surface, real control lay in the hands of a few powerful aristocratic families, the patricians. The common people, or plebeians, had limited rights and little political influence. Over time, they pushed for and won more power, creating assemblies and electing tribunes to represent their interests. Yet Rome's greatest strength was not its political system, but its relentless ambition. As the Republic matured, it began expanding beyond its modest beginnings. First, it subdued neighboring Latin and Etruscan towns. Then it pushed outward, conquering much of the Italian peninsula. Its armies were disciplined, innovative, and fiercely loyal, the product of a society that treated military service as the highest duty. But with expansion came new enemies, none more formidable than Carthage, a wealthy maritime power in North Africa. The rivalry between Rome and Carthage erupted into the Punic Wars, 3 brutal conflicts that would shape the destiny of the Mediterranean. The First Punic War, fought from 264 to 241 BCE, was a naval struggle for control of Sicily. Despite lacking a navy at the start, Rome built one from scratch and emerged victorious, claiming Sicily as its first overseas province. The Second Punic War was even more dramatic. In 218 BCE, the Carthaginian general Hannibal led an army, complete with war elephants, across the Alps into Italy. For years, he ravaged the Roman countryside, winning stunning victories at battles like Cannae. Yet Rome refused to surrender. Rome's resilience in the face of Hannibal's invasion became legendary. Under the brilliant general Scipio Africanus, Roman legions turned the tide by carrying the war to North Africa itself. In 202 BCE, Scipio defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama, forcing Carthage into humiliating peace terms. But Rome was not finished. In the Third Punic War, fought from 149 to 146 BCE, Roman forces besieged and completely destroyed Carthage, burning the city to the ground and enslaving its people. The Mediterranean was now a Roman lake. Yet this victory came at a cost. Wealth and slaves poured into Rome, enriching the elite while the poor sank deeper into poverty. The social fabric strained under inequality, corruption, and political violence. Ambitious generals began using their armies to seize power, and the Republic slowly started to unravel. The first great cracks appeared with Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Marius reformed the army, recruiting the landless poor and making soldiers loyal to their commanders rather than the state. Sulla marched his legions on Rome itself, seizing control and declaring himself dictator. Civil war became the new normal, setting a dangerous precedent that others would follow. Into this volatile world stepped Julius Caesar, a man whose ambition matched Rome's own. Brilliant, charismatic, and ruthless, Caesar conquered Gaul, extending Roman territory to the Atlantic and becoming a hero to the people. But his rising power alarmed the Senate. Ordered to disband his army, Caesar instead crossed the Rubicon River in 49 BCE, a direct act of war against the Republic. Civil war erupted once again. Caesar emerged triumphant from the chaos and declared himself dictator for life. He introduced sweeping reforms, expanded citizenship, and restructured the Senate. But many feared he would crown himself king, a word that still haunted Roman memory. On the Ides of March 44 BCE, a group of senators, including some of his closest allies, stabbed Caesar to death on the Senate floor. Their hope was to restore the Republic, but instead they plunged Rome into yet another series of civil wars. Caesar's death unleashed a power struggle between his supporters and his assassins, culminating in the rise of a new political alliance, the Second Triumvirate, formed by Mark Antony, Lepidus, and Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian. The alliance quickly disintegrated as ambition and mistrust tore it apart. Antony allied himself with Cleopatra of Egypt, while Octavian positioned himself as the defender of Rome's traditions. Their rivalry culminated in the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian's forces decisively defeated Antony and Cleopatra. With his enemies dead, Octavian consolidated power. In 27 BCE, the Senate granted him the title Augustus, marking the birth of the Roman Empire and the end of the Republic. Augustus ruled with careful restraint, maintaining republican forms while holding absolute authority. His reign ushered in the Pax Romana, 2 centuries of relative peace, prosperity, and stability across the empire.
During the Pax Romana, Rome became the beating heart of a vast empire, stretching from the windswept moors of Britain to the deserts of Egypt, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Euphrates River. Its population soared past 100 million, nearly 1/5 of the world's total. Roads and aqueducts connected distant provinces. Trade flourished, and cities across the empire mirrored the grandeur of Rome itself, with forums, amphitheaters, and temples. Roman law became the foundation for justice. Latin spread as the language of power and culture, and monumental architecture like the Colosseum and Pantheon demonstrated Rome's engineering genius. The empire had reached a height of power and sophistication unmatched in the ancient world. Life inside the Roman Empire was as complex and diverse as the empire itself. Society was deeply hierarchical. At the top stood the emperor and the senatorial elite, wealthy and powerful beyond imagination. Below them were the equestrians, a class of wealthy citizens often serving as administrators and tax collectors. The majority of people were plebeians, farmers, merchants, soldiers, and artisans who made up the backbone of the empire. At the very bottom were slaves, millions of them, captured in war or born into bondage, who built the roads, served in households, and fueled the economy. Yet, remarkably, Roman society offered a level of mobility rare for the ancient world. A freed slave could become a citizen. A provincial governor could rise to the Senate. Even emperors like Diocletian and Maximinus Thrax sometimes came from humble origins, proving that ambition could transcend birth. Religion played a central role in Roman life. The Romans worshipped a vast pantheon of gods, with Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva at the head. Every aspect of life, from politics to farming, was tied to divine favor, and rituals, sacrifices, and festivals filled the calendar. Conquered peoples were generally allowed to continue their own religious traditions, as long as they also paid homage to Roman deities and the divine emperor. But in the 1st century CE, a new faith began to spread from a remote province in Judea. A faith that would eventually transform the empire from within. Christianity, based on the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth, preached equality, mercy, and salvation. Ideas that clashed with Roman authority. Early Christians refused to worship the emperor, defied state rituals, and were brutally persecuted. Yet persecution only strengthened their resolve, and the faith continued to grow. By the early 4th century, Christianity had become too widespread to suppress. Emperor Constantine, after claiming victory in a civil war that he believed was guided by the Christian God, issued the Edict of Milan in 313 CE. Granting religious tolerance throughout the empire. Later, Christianity would become the state religion under Emperor Theodosius I. The shift from paganism to Christianity was one of the most profound cultural transformations in history. Temples gave way to churches. Bishops became powerful political figures, and the church itself grew into one of the empire's most influential institutions. The Roman world, once defined by polytheism and imperial cults, now found unity in a single faith, one that would shape Europe for the next 2 millennia. But even as Rome underwent a spiritual transformation, cracks were spreading beneath the surface. The empire's vast size made governance increasingly difficult. Communication across thousands of miles was slow, and distant provinces often acted independently. Corruption and inefficiency plagued the bureaucracy. Defending long frontiers drained the treasury, and Rome became reliant on foreign mercenaries whose loyalty was uncertain. Economic troubles worsened as heavy taxation burdened the poor, while the elite grew richer. Meanwhile, external threats multiplied. Germanic tribes pressed against the Rhine and Danube, while the Sasanian Persians challenged Rome in the east. Plagues swept through the empire, killing millions. The once unstoppable machine began to stall. The 2nd and 3rd centuries CE were marked by crisis and instability. Emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed, many murdered by their own soldiers. Civil wars fractured the empire repeatedly. In less than 50 years, over 24 emperors claimed the throne. The 3rd century was a near-death experience for Rome, but it also produced leaders determined to save it. Emperor Diocletian, who came to power in 284 CE, realized that the empire was too large for one man to rule. He divided it into 2 halves, east and west, each with its own emperor and administration. This tetrarchy temporarily stabilized the empire. Diocletian also enacted sweeping reforms. He restructured the military, attempted to control runaway inflation, and strengthened the imperial bureaucracy. His measures bought Rome precious time, but its underlying problems remained. In 312 CE, a new figure rose to power who would forever change the fate of the empire. Constantine the Great. After defeating his rivals in a series of brutal civil wars, Constantine became sole ruler of Rome. Realizing the strategic and political limitations of the old capital, he founded a new one, Constantinople, on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. Perched at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, this new capital became the beating heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. Constantine also deepened Rome's embrace of Christianity, not just legalizing it, but actively supporting the church. He called councils to settle theological disputes, endowed churches with wealth, and tied imperial authority to Christian ideology. The once pagan empire was now a Christian state, and its center of gravity had shifted eastward. The division of the empire into east and west, formalized after Constantine's death, was both a solution and a symptom of Rome's troubles. The Eastern Empire, wealthier and more urbanized, thrived, while the Western Empire, plagued by economic decline, weaker defenses, and constant invasions, struggled to survive. Germanic tribes such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths pushed relentlessly across the frontiers. The Huns, a nomadic people from Central Asia, swept into Europe, displacing tribes and triggering waves of migration into Roman territory. The once impenetrable limes, the fortified borders, were breached again and again. In 378 CE, at the Battle of Adrianople, the Eastern Roman army was annihilated by Gothic forces, a devastating blow that exposed Rome's vulnerability and shattered its aura of invincibility. The 5th century was a death spiral for the Western Roman Empire. In 410 CE, Rome itself was sacked by the Visigoths under Alaric, the first time in nearly 8 centuries that the Eternal City had fallen to a foreign enemy. The psychological impact was immense. More invasions followed. The Vandals crossed into North Africa, capturing Carthage. The Huns, led by the fearsome Attila, ravaged Gaul and Italy. Provinces broke away or fell under barbarian control, and Roman authority crumbled. The Western government, mired in corruption and factionalism, proved powerless to stop the collapse. By the mid-400s, the Western emperors were little more than puppets, manipulated by barbarian generals who held real power. The end came quietly. In 476 CE, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the boy emperor Romulus Augustus and sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, symbolically returning authority to the Eastern emperor. The Western Roman Empire was gone. Yet the Eastern Empire, now known as the Byzantine Empire, lived on. Centered in Constantinople, it preserved Roman law, culture, and traditions for another 1,000 years. It was a Christian empire, a Greek-speaking empire, but in its heart, it remained Roman. The Byzantines considered themselves the true heirs of Rome, and in many ways they were. They continued to fight wars, build cities, create art, and preserve knowledge, even as the Western world descended into what would later be called the Dark Ages. The Byzantine Empire endured countless challenges: wars with Persians, Arabs, and Turks, devastating plagues, internal revolts, and the Fourth Crusade, which sacked Constantinople itself. Yet it persisted, a beacon of continuity and civilization. It was not until 1453, nearly a millennium after the fall of the West, that the last vestige of Rome finally fell. The Ottoman Turks, armed with gunpowder cannons and overwhelming force, breached Constantinople's walls after a brutal siege. Emperor Constantine XI died defending his city. And with his death, the Roman Empire, born from myth on the banks of the Tiber, came to an end. More than 2,000 years after Romulus and Remus, Rome's story had finally closed. Though the Roman Empire had vanished from the political map, its spirit continued to shape the world that followed. Roman law became the backbone of legal systems across Europe and beyond. Principles like innocent until proven guilty, equality before the law, and citizens' rights, ideas we now consider universal, were first codified in Roman courts and carried forward into modern justice. The Latin language, once spoken from the Scottish Highlands to the sands of Syria, evolved into the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, and deeply influenced English and many others. The Roman alphabet became the script of the Western world, and even the names of our months, our planets, and our political institutions are Roman in origin. Roman engineering left a legacy that remains visible today. Their aqueducts, masterpieces of design and precision, carried fresh water over vast distances, some still functioning centuries later. Their roads, famously straight and meticulously built, stitched the empire together and laid the groundwork for modern infrastructure. Many of Europe's highways and trade routes trace the paths first paved by Roman engineers. Their architecture, too, reshaped human imagination. The use of the arch, the dome, and concrete allowed them to build structures on a scale never before seen. Monuments like the Colosseum, the Pantheon, and Hadrian's Wall still stand as timeless reminders of Roman ambition and genius. Even political ideas born in Rome continue to echo through modern societies. The concepts of a Senate, a republic, and checks and balances on power were pioneered in the Roman state, and inspired the framers of modern democracies. The US Capitol building, the French Senate, and countless parliamentary institutions around the world borrow not only their names, but their spirit from the Roman model. The dream of Pax Romana, peace through law and order, influenced everything from the formation of empires to the creation of the European Union. The idea that diverse peoples can coexist under shared laws traces back to Rome's ability to unite millions under a single system of governance. Beyond politics and infrastructure, Rome's cultural and intellectual legacy endured as well. Roman literature, from Virgil's epic Aeneid to the biting satires of Juvenal, shaped Western storytelling. Roman philosophy, heavily influenced by the Greeks but uniquely practical, gave rise to Stoicism, a school of thought that continues to guide leaders, thinkers, and everyday people. The Roman approach to history, law, rhetoric, and education became the foundation of the Western intellectual tradition. Even the Christian Church, which grew within and was shaped by the Roman world, inherited its organizational structure, terminology, and sense of universality from the empire that once tried to destroy it. In the end, the story of Rome is not simply one of rise and fall. It is the story of transformation. From a village on the banks of the Tiber, it grew into a republic, then into the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen. It conquered and assimilated, built and destroyed, created and redefined. And even when its banners fell and its armies vanished, Rome refused to die. It lived on, in our laws, our languages, our cities, and our dreams. More than 2,000 years later, the Roman Empire still shapes the way we think about power, civilization, and ourselves. That is the ultimate twist of history. Empires may crumble, but ideas, the greatest legacy of Rome, endure forever.